"Let the girl go or I'll call the police." Anna's voice, high and trembling, cut through the damp alley like a siren. She was only 6 years old. Clutching a bag of groceries meant for her grandmother's medicine, her heart raced. But her eyes stayed fixed on the 3 men surrounding a blonde-haired child no older than 8. A pistol gleamed under the flickering streetlight, pressed hard against the little girl's ribs. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The men smirked at the sound of a child daring to interrupt them. One of them spat onto the ground. "Run along, kid. This ain't your business." But Anna didn't run. She glanced down at the paper bag in her hands. Inside, along with bread and milk, was a tin of powdered milk. Her grandmother had sent her to buy it, heavy and awkward to carry. Now, in this moment, Anna saw it differently. She gripped the tin tightly, took one sharp breath, and with all her might, hurled it. The lid popped loose in the air, and a white cloud of powder burst into the men's faces. Coughs erupted immediately, harsh, ragged, and choking. Their grip on the blonde girl faltered. "Go!" Anna shouted, her small voice rising above the chaos. She darted forward, yanked the girl's wrist, and pulled her free. The girl stumbled but didn't resist, eyes wide with desperate relief. Together, the 2 children bolted toward the open end of the alley. The kidnappers cursed, hacking and wiping powder from their eyes. Their shouts followed close behind. But Anna did something unexpected. She stopped, turned, and screamed at the top of her lungs. "Help! Somebody help us! They're trying to take her!" Her cry pierced the night. A window cracked open above. A porch light flicked on at the end of the block. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed as neighbors peeked out from doorways. The men froze, sudden panic cutting through their anger. Attention was the last thing they wanted. And then came the sirens. Red and blue lights spilled across the narrow street. Police cars screeched to a halt, doors flung open. Officers spilled out, weapons drawn. Hands where we can see them. The kidnappers' courage evaporated. They dropped their weapons and raised their hands as officers rushed in, cuffing them one by one. The powder still hung in the air, making the scene surreal like smoke after a fire. Evidence of a small girl's courage, Anna clung to the blonde child, who was shaking too hard to speak. An officer crouched beside them, his voice gentle. "You girls are safe now. What are your names?" "I'm Anna," she whispered, still clutching the child's hand. The other girl lifted her tear-streaked face. "Emily Walker." At that name, the officers exchanged quick glances. One spoke into his radio immediately. "We've got Richard Walker's daughter." "Repeat, the girl is safe." Within minutes, the 2 children were wrapped in blankets and escorted to the police station. There, under the harsh but safe light of the precinct, they sat side by side on a bench, sipping from small paper cups of water. Officers moved briskly around them, asking gentle questions, writing notes, promising they were safe now. Emily clung to Anna's hand as if it were an anchor. "She saved me," Emily whispered to anyone who would listen. "She threw something. She made them cough so I could get away." Anna's cheeks flushed, but she said nothing. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "You may be small, but you can still be brave." The station doors burst open a short while later, and a tall man in a dark suit strode inside, flanked by security. His face was pale with fear, eyes searching frantically until they fell on the little blonde girl. "Emily! Daddy!" Emily cried, leaping from the bench. She ran into his arms, sobbing against his chest as he held her tight, pressing kisses to her hair. Relief broke across his features like a storm passing. Richard Walker, billionaire businessman, turned to the officers, his voice raw. "Thank God. Thank you for bringing her back." Then his gaze shifted to Anna, the small, wide-eyed girl standing quietly nearby, her jacket still dusted with milk powder. Emily tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, this is Anna. She saved me." Richard's eyes softened. He crouched down until he was at Anna's level. For a long moment, he simply studied her, this tiny child from a poor block who had stood up against armed men when no one else dared. "Anna," he said, his voice husky, "you saved my daughter's life. You saved my life too. I don't know how I'll ever thank you. Anna shifted, uncomfortable under the weight of his gratitude. She only shrugged, her voice barely above a whisper. She needed help. Richard reached out and gently took her small hand in both of his. The world needs more hearts like yours, he said. His words carried the kind of weight that would linger long after the night had ended. If that moment touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share in the comments where you're watching from. Let me know how this story made you feel, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next story. And for the first time that evening, Anna allowed herself a small, tired smile. She hadn't just kept a promise to her grandmother. She had changed the fate of 2 families, though she was far too young to understand just how much. The fluorescent lights of the precinct hummed steadily, a sterile brightness that made everything look sharper, harsher, almost too real. Anna sat stiffly on a wooden bench beside Emily, her small legs swinging just above the floor. The blanket draped around her shoulders felt scratchy, but she clutched it anyway, more out of nerves than warmth. The adrenaline from the alley had begun to wear off, leaving behind the tremors of what she had just done. 6 years old, and she had stood against men with guns. 6 years old, and she was sitting in a police station like someone who had fought in a war. Emily leaned against her, whispering in a shaky voice, "I thought I was going to die, if you hadn't been there." She trailed off, biting her lip hard. Her small fingers clenched Anna's hand, as if she feared letting go might pull her back into danger. Across the room, officers spoke in low, brisk tones. Their uniforms rustled, their radios crackled, and the constant tapping of a keyboard filled the air as one officer typed reports. The kidnappers had been taken into custody. Anna had seen them shoved into police cruisers, still coughing, their wrists bound in cuffs, but the sound of their threats lingered in her ears. Detective Harris, a tall man with streaks of gray at his temples, approached with a soft smile. He crouched down to eye level with the 2 girls. "You're both very brave," he said, "but I need to ask you a few questions, just to make sure we understand what happened." "Is that all right?" Emily nodded quickly, though her voice trembled as she spoke. "They grabbed me when I was walking home from school. They kept saying something about my dad, about a USB. They said they'd kill me if he didn't give it to them." Harris's eyes flickered briefly, a shadow of understanding passing over his features. "And you, Anna?" Anna swallowed, her small voice uneven. "I saw them. I shouted. Then I threw the milk powder at them so they'd cough. And we could run." She looked down at her shoes. "I just didn't want them to hurt her." The detective's smile deepened, touched with something like awe. "That was quick thinking. Dangerous but smart. You saved her life." Anna didn't know what to say. She shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. Being called a hero didn't feel right. She hadn't felt heroic in that alley. She had felt terrified, but she also knew she couldn't have done anything else. The door to the station opened again, and Richard Walker strode in, his presence filling the room. The billionaire's tailored suit looked out of place against the scuffed linoleum and dented desks. His eyes, sharp but rimmed with exhaustion, scanned the room until they landed on Emily. In 2 strides, he crossed the distance and pulled her into his arms. "Daddy," Emily sobbed, burying her face in his chest. He rocked her gently, whispering words no one else could hear. Words that trembled with relief. After a long moment, he looked up, his gaze falling on Anna. She sat frozen, unsure what to do, her blanket sliding slightly from her shoulders. He rose, still holding Emily close, and approached her. "You must be Anna," he said quietly. His voice was deep, firm, but softened by gratitude. "You saved my daughter." Anna's cheeks flushed, and she shook her head. I just helped her get away." Richard crouched so he was eye level with her. He studied her small, serious face. The dirt smudged on her cheek. The stubborn steadiness in her eyes. "Don't dismiss what you did. You stood up when no one else did. That takes courage most adults don't have." Emily wriggled in her father's arms, turning toward Anna. "Daddy." She threw milk in their faces. They couldn't breathe. And we ran. If she hadn't been there, they'd still have me. For a moment, silence hung between them. Then Richard reached out, resting his hand gently on Anna's shoulder. I owe you more than I can ever repay. His voice grew heavier, a shadow creeping in, and I owe those men something else. They didn't just try to take my daughter. They tried to take my work. The trust of people who depend on me. That USB. He stopped, realizing he'd said too much, and shook his head. It doesn't matter. What matters is you're safe. Detective Harris cleared his throat. Mr. Walker, we'll need your statement as well. The men admitted this wasn't about ransom and money. They wanted sensitive data. We'll have to investigate further, but tonight, your daughter is safe, thanks to Anna. No, Richard nodded, but his eyes never left Anna. Where are her parents? He asked. She lives with her grandmother, Harris answered. We've already called her. She's on her way. As if summoned by his words, the door opened again and an older woman hurried in, her worn coat buttoned askew. Gray hair tucked under a scarf. Her face was drawn with worry, but when she saw Anna sitting safely, she rushed forward. Anna, child. She wrapped her granddaughter in her arms, holding her so tightly Anna squeaked from the pressure. Thank the Lord, you're safe. Richard watched the embrace, something flickering in his eyes, a memory, perhaps, of simpler beginnings, of his own childhood when survival had meant holding on to someone you loved. He looked at Anna again, this tiny child who had risked everything for a stranger. Detective, he said quietly, make sure she and her grandmother get home safe tonight. And tomorrow, I want to speak with them again. His gaze softened. There's something I need to do for this family. Anna pulled back from her grandmother's arms, blinking up at him. You don't have to, she whispered. I just didn't want them to hurt Emily. Richard smiled faintly, but his eyes were serious. Sometimes, Anna, doing what you don't have to is what changes the world. The hum of the precinct filled the silence that followed phones ringing, officers moving briskly, doors opening and closing. But for the four of them, billionaire, daughter, grandmother, and little girl, the world had shrunk to a single corner bench under the buzzing lights. Emily leaned her head against Anna's shoulder, her voice soft. You're my hero. Anna felt her chest tighten. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a girl who wanted to go home, drink warm milk, and curl up beside her grandmother. But as she looked at Emily's smile, tired but alive, she thought maybe being a hero wasn't about feeling strong. Maybe it was about doing the right thing. Even when you were small. The police station grew quieter as the night deepened. Most of the officers who had rushed to the scene of the kidnapping were now buried in reports, their voices low, their pens scratching steadily across paper. Outside the windows, the city buzzed with late traffic and the faint wail of sirens from somewhere far off. For Anna, the world felt enormous and yet very small, reduced to the wooden bench where she sat, the warmth of her grandmother's arm around her shoulders, and the steady rhythm of Emily's breathing beside her. Richard Walker stood across the room, speaking with Detective Harris, in hushed but urgent tones. His broad shoulders seemed weighed down by more than just the fear of losing his daughter. He carried something else, something heavier, every now and then. His eyes flicked toward Anna, studying her as if she were a puzzle piece that had fallen into his life by accident. Tell me straight, Richard said to Harris, his voice low but edged with steel. Did they mention the USB? I heard it from my daughter's own mouth. That's what they wanted. Harris nodded grimly. Yes, they demanded it as ransom. Said you'd know exactly which one they meant. I don't have to tell you how unusual that is. They weren't after cash. They were after leverage. Richard's jaw tightened. He ran a hand through his neatly combed hair, suddenly looking older than his 45 years. That drive contains trade secrets, sensitive partnerships. If it fell into the wrong hands, entire companies, entire communities could collapse. People would lose their livelihoods. Families would suffer. He exhaled sharply, lowering his voice further. They weren't just trying to hurt me. They wanted to burn the world around me. Harris gave him a steady look. Then we need to know how they even knew about it. These weren't random thugs. At least one of them had insider knowledge. Richard's eyes darkened. Mark. He spat the name like poison. I should have known. He worked in compliance. I fired him 6 months ago for falsifying accounts. He threatened me that day, said I'd regret it, and now here we are. On the bench, Anna strained to hear, though she understood little. Emily shifted closer to her, whispering, "They're talking about Mark. He used to come to our house sometimes. He scared me. He was always angry." She clutched Anna's hand tighter. "I don't ever want to see him again." Anna pressed her lips together, unsure what to say. She had no concept of corporate secrets or data drives. But she understood fear. She understood what it felt like to be small and hunted. She squeezed Emily's hand back, silent reassurance passing between them. A young officer stepped forward and offered them each a small cup of hot chocolate. Anna accepted hers with both hands, warming her fingers against the paper cup. The sweet steam curled into her nose, reminding her of winter mornings at home when her grandmother stretched their food as far as it would go. Even in the middle of a police station, even with the weight of danger still hanging in the air, the taste of chocolate gave her courage. Richard finally crossed the room, his steps heavy but deliberate. He stopped before Anna and her grandmother, lowering himself into a chair so he was at their level. For a moment, he simply looked at them. His expensive suit, his polished shoes, seemed out of place beside Anna's scuffed sneakers and her grandmother's fraying scarf. And yet, in this moment, they were bound together by what had happened. "Mrs. Johnson," he began, addressing Anna's grandmother respectfully, "I owe your granddaughter more than I can say. She risked her life tonight to save Emily." The old woman's eyes softened as she glanced down at Anna, who was sipping her cocoa quietly. "That's just who she is. She doesn't like to see anyone bullied, no matter how big the bully might be." Richard's lips pressed into a thin line. He looked directly at Anna. "You didn't just help my daughter. You helped expose something rotten in my world. And I promise you, Anna, I won't forget that." Anna blinked up at him, unsure how to respond. She wasn't used to adults speaking to her like that with gravity, as though her choices mattered. She swallowed hard and whispered, "I just didn't want them to hurt her." Richard's gaze lingered on her a moment longer, then he nodded. Sometimes the simplest reasons are the most powerful. Detective Harris returned with a folder in hand. "Mr. Walker, we'll need you and your daughter to sign statements tonight. After that, we'll increase security around your family. Whoever else might be involved, they'll know their first attempt failed." Richard looked down at Emily, who still clung to Anna. "We'll cooperate, but I need to make something clear if they come after her again." His jaw tightened. "I won't wait for protocol. I'll protect my daughter with everything I have." Anna's grandmother stirred uneasily. "And what about children like Anna? She's brave, yes, but she's only 6. Who protects her?" The words hung heavy in the room. Richard's expression shifted, guilt flickering in his eyes. For a moment, he had no answer. Then he said quietly, "You're right. She deserves protection too. And I'll see to it." The hour grew late. One by one, officers finished their questions. Papers were signed. Emily dozed against Anna's shoulder, her trust so complete that she could finally sleep. Anna stared at the badge pinned to Detective Harris's chest, as he assured her grandmother they would be escorted home safely. As Richard prepared to leave, he paused beside Anna once more. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "I want to see you again. Both of you. There's more I need to say, and more I need to do. Tonight you gave me back my daughter. Tomorrow, I'll start finding a way to give something back to you." Anna nodded faintly, not sure what he meant, but feeling the weight of his promise. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She only knew that tonight, in a world full of shadows, she had chosen to act, and in doing so, she had stepped into a story much bigger than herself. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the city skyline with streaks of pale gold. When Anna awoke in her grandmother's small apartment, the thin curtains did little to block the light, but the warmth of the morning seeped in gently. She stirred on the worn sofa, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. The night before still pressed heavily on her mind: the alley, the men, Emily's tears. the police station's bright lights. For a moment she wondered if it had been a dream, but the faint bruise on her elbow where she had been shoved reminded her it was all too real. Her grandmother, Mrs. Johnson, was already up, humming softly in the kitchen as she prepared oatmeal. The smell of cinnamon and sugar filled the room, a rare treat that told Anna her grandmother was trying to ease the fear still clinging to them both. "You slept like a rock," her grandmother said kindly, setting a steaming bowl on the table. "Eat, child. You'll need your strength today." Anna blinked. "Why today?" Her grandmother smiled faintly, though her eyes were shadowed with worry. "Because that man, Mr. Walker, he asked us to see him. And when a man like that asks, it isn't wise to refuse." Anna remembered the way Richard Walker had spoken to her at the station. His voice hadn't sounded like the voices of the wealthy men she sometimes overheard on television. It had been softer, heavy with something deeper than pride. She had saved his daughter. And now he wanted… what? To thank her? To repay her? Anna wasn't sure. By mid-morning, a sleek black car pulled up outside their apartment building. Its polished surface gleamed like a mirror, completely out of place among the rusted railings and cracked pavement. A man in a dark suit stepped out and knocked gently on the door. "Mrs. Johnson, Mr. Walker sent me to escort you." Anna clutched her grandmother's hand tightly as they followed him to the car. Inside, the seats were soft leather, warmer than any chair Anna had ever known. The city passed by in a blur outside the tinted windows' graffiti-painted walls, giving way to gleaming towers of glass and steel. They arrived at a tall building in the heart of the financial district. Security guards opened the doors and guided them through the lobby, where marble floors reflected the morning light. Anna's small shoes squeaked faintly on the polished stone, and she felt impossibly small among the towering adults. At the top floor, Richard Walker waited. He was dressed in another suit, crisp and immaculate, but his eyes lit with genuine relief when he saw them. Emily ran across the room the moment Anna entered, wrapping her arms around her friend. "You came. I was so afraid I wouldn't see you again." Anna hugged her back shyly. "I told you we'd both be safe." Richard approached slowly, his gaze moving between Anna and her grandmother. "Mrs. Johnson." "Anna, thank you for coming." His tone carried the gravity of a man used to commanding boardrooms, yet softened with warmth. "I owe you more than words. You saved my daughter's life." Mrs. Johnson inclined her head. "Children shouldn't have to be so brave. But Anna has always had a strong spirit." Richard crouched to meet Anna's eyes, just as he had at the station. "I promised you I'd find a way to give something back. I meant it. Whatever you need, schooling, security, a better place to live, I will provide it. Not charity," he added quickly, seeing Mrs. Johnson's stiff posture. "Gratitude and respect." Anna fidgeted, unsure how to respond. She wasn't used to people offering her things. She thought of the alley, of Emily's frightened eyes, of the way she had thrown the powdered milk. She hadn't done it for reward. She had done it because it was the right thing. "I don't need anything," she whispered at last. "I just wanted Emily to be safe." Richard studied her, then gave a small, almost wistful smile. "That's what makes you remarkable." He straightened, his voice hardening slightly, as he turned to Mrs. Johnson. "But whether you ask or not, I won't let this girl grow up without the opportunities she deserves. She's proven herself braver than men twice her age." Before Mrs. Johnson could reply, Detective Harris entered the office. He carried a folder, his expression serious. "Mr. Walker, we've confirmed one of the suspects is indeed Mark Daniels, your former employee. He confessed that the plan was bigger than just ransom. They wanted the USB, and someone else was backing them. We believe he isn't working alone." Richard's jaw clenched. "Who?" Harris shook his head. "We don't know yet. But the fact that they targeted your daughter tells us they're desperate and ruthless." He glanced at Anna and Emily, his voice gentling. "We'll increase security around both families. Until we find out who's pulling the strings, no one is safe." Emily squeezed Anna's hand, whispering, I'm glad you're here. Anna nodded, but fear stirred in her stomach. She had thought the nightmare was over, that the men were gone. Now she realized it was only beginning. Richard placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder, then looked at Anna with a solemn promise. No harm will come to either of you. Whoever is behind this, I'll find them, and I'll make sure justice is served. The words carried a weight that silenced the room. For Anna, still only 6, the idea of justice was something distant, abstract. But as she looked at Richard's eyes fierce, unyielding, she felt the fragile thread of safety stretch just a little stronger. Outside the tower's windows, the city gleamed in the morning light, unaware of the storm gathering within. For Anna, Emily, and Richard, the battle had only just begun. The Walker building hummed with quiet efficiency. The kind of place where people in sharp suits moved with purpose, where voices stayed low and urgent, and every clock ticked in rhythm with the pulse of business. Yet beneath the polished marble and glass, an unease lingered. The kidnapping was supposed to be over. The men had been arrested, but Detective Harris's words, "he isn't working alone," clung to Richard Walker's mind like a shadow he could not shake. Anna sat in a leather chair too big for her, her legs dangling above the floor. She clutched a cookie Emily had pressed into her hand, though she hadn't taken more than a nibble. Emily, on the other hand, chattered softly, as if speaking could banish the silence that kept creeping back into the room. "This is my daddy's office. He has lots of meetings here. Look, there's a picture of me when I was little." She pointed to a silver frame on the desk, showing a toddler in pigtails grinning with ice cream on her cheeks. Anna managed a shy smile, but her eyes drifted toward the window. The city spread wide below them, alive and restless. Somewhere out there, she knew, people were plotting terrible things. She felt small, smaller than ever, but she also felt the weight of last night, the way Emily had clung to her, the way the kidnapper's eyes had burned with anger. Richard ended a call and turned back toward the girls and Mrs. Johnson. His voice was steady, but his jaw remained tight. "Security is on high alert. No one enters this building without clearance. Until we know who else is involved, Emily will not leave my side." His gaze softened as it landed on Anna. "And that goes for you too, if you'll allow it. At least until we're sure you're safe." Mrs. Johnson shifted uncomfortably. "We don't belong in your world, Mr. Walker. We live quietly. My granddaughter doesn't need to be paraded around boardrooms." Richard's tone gentled. "This isn't about parading her. It's about protecting her. Whoever came after Emily may see Anna as a threat now, the girl who ruined their plan. I won't risk them finding her." Anna looked up, startled. She hadn't thought of that. She had acted without thinking, and now the thought that someone might want to hurt her made her stomach twist. Yet when she glanced at Emily, who smiled with fragile gratitude, Anna's chin lifted just a little. If danger returned, she would not run. Detective Harris re-entered with files tucked under his arm. "We dug deeper into Mark Daniels," he said. "He didn't have the resources to organize this alone. He had debts, large ones tied to a shell company with offshore accounts. Whoever was backing him has money, connections, and a reason to target you, Mr. Walker." "Oh." Richard leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "Competitors, rivals who would pay anything to bring me down. They'd weaponize secrets, trade deals, patents, all of it." His voice lowered. "And they used my daughter to try to force my hand." Emily shivered and pressed closer to Anna. The smaller girl wrapped her arms around her instinctively, her small body becoming a shield. Harris noticed the gesture and nodded slightly, as if reassured. "We'll assign undercover officers to keep an eye on the family residence in this building," Harris continued. "But I have to be blunt. This isn't over. Whoever wanted that USB will try again. And next time they might not rely on amateurs." Mrs. Johnson sighed, her hand resting on Anna's shoulder. "Then what hope do we have? We're ordinary people. We can't fight men with guns and power." Richard's eyes flashed with a quiet fire. "No one is ordinary when they stand for what's right." Anna proved that. She didn't think about power or danger, she acted. "And that's the kind of courage I intend to match." He turned back to Harris. "Find me everything on this shell company. If they think they can terrorize my family into handing over secrets, they're wrong." The detective gave a curt nod. "We'll follow the trail. But Walker, you need to prepare yourself. This enemy knows where to hit you hardest. Family, trust, reputation." The weight of those words filled the room. Emily's hand tightened around Anna's. Mrs. Johnson whispered a quiet prayer under her breath, and Anna, small but unyielding, whispered inside her own heart, "If they come again, I won't let them take her. Not ever." The rest of the day passed in cautious routines. Richard's office buzzed with calls, meetings, and strategizing with lawyers and advisors. Through it all, Anna and Emily stayed together. They shared crayons at a side table, drew shaky pictures of houses and gardens, anything to distract from the heaviness surrounding them. Richard watched them sometimes, his expression softening as he saw his daughter's laughter return in small bursts, thanks to the little girl from the other side of town. By evening, the girls were escorted to a secure residence, a penthouse apartment guarded by security. Mrs. Johnson looked uncomfortable amid the luxury, but Richard insisted, "Just for now, until the danger passes." Anna curled into bed beside Emily that night, the city lights glowing outside their window. Emily whispered, "Do you think they'll come back?" Anna hesitated, then whispered back, "Maybe, but if they do, we'll face them together." For two children who should have only worried about school and play, it was a promise forged in shadows and fear and in courage that glowed quietly like a flame refusing to be extinguished. The penthouse was quiet except for the soft hum of the city outside its tall windows. Streetlights glowed like tiny stars, and the traffic below wove threads of red and white along the avenues. For most children, it would have felt magical, like being in a castle high above the world. But for Anna, the silence was heavy. She lay awake on a bed far softer than anything she had ever known, staring at the ceiling, listening to Emily's steady breathing beside her. She could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the alley again, the men's faces twisted in anger, the gun flashing under the streetlight, the cloud of powdered milk hanging in the air. Her small fists clenched at the memory. She was only 6, but she understood something had changed. She had stepped into danger and survived. But danger might not be done with her. Mrs. Johnson slept in the next room, restless in a bed too grand for her comfort. She had whispered prayers before falling asleep, asking for strength, asking for protection. Anna had listened, but even prayers felt fragile tonight. Across the hall, Richard Walker sat in his study, the glow of his computer lighting his face. He had sent his staff home, kept only 2 security guards outside the door, and pored over reports Detective Harris had delivered earlier. The shell company backing Mark Daniels had roots that ran deep. Too deep. Accounts scattered through the Caribbean, hidden investors, trails designed to confuse. Someone had put a lot of effort into covering their tracks. Richard leaned back, rubbing his temples. For all his wealth and influence, for all the deals he had negotiated, this was different. This was personal. His daughter's safety had been gambled against corporate greed. His voice broke softly in the empty room. "They will never touch her again. Never." The quiet was broken by a knock at the door. One of the guards stepped in. "Sir, everything's secure, but there's something you should see." Richard followed him to the lobby of the building. On the security monitor, a black sedan was parked across the street. Its windows were tinted, its engine idling. It hadn't moved in nearly an hour. "Just a car," Richard murmured, though unease tightened in his chest. "Maybe," the guard replied. "But we've seen it twice today. Once outside your office, now here." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Keep watch. If it doesn't leave within 30 minutes, I want the plates run." Back upstairs, Anna stirred again, sitting up and peeking out the window. From the penthouse view, the sedan looked like nothing more than a shadow among many, but her child's instinct, sharpened by fear, whispered it was wrong. She nudged Emily gently awake. She whispered, "Someone's watching." Emily blinked sleepily, then frowned. "Daddy will protect us." Anna nodded. But she didn't lie to herself. She knew adults couldn't see everything. Sometimes, it took small eyes to notice. By morning, the car was gone. Security reported nothing unusual, but the seed of worry had been planted. Richard had breakfast with his daughter and Anna, trying to appear calm. He poured orange juice into glasses, spread butter across toast, made conversation about school and dolls and play. But beneath his words, his mind raced. Mrs. Johnson sipped coffee at the far end of the table, watching him carefully. At last, she spoke. "Mr. Walker, I appreciate your hospitality, but I know when danger is circling. You cannot keep these girls under lock and key forever." Richard set down his cup. "Until I know who's behind this, I have no choice. If they could orchestrate a kidnapping once, they can do it again. And this time, they might not fail." Emily's lip trembled. She leaned against her father's arm. "I don't want them to try again, Daddy. I don't want them to hurt Anna either." Anna stayed quiet. Her small hand folded in her lap. She knew what Emily was saying. They were in this together now. Whatever enemy hunted Richard's family had seen her face too. Later that day, Detective Harris returned with an update. He spread documents across Richard's desk. His tone grim. "The shell company links back to a rival firm. But it's not just competition. It's betrayal. Someone inside your circle passed information. Someone you trusted." Richard's face hardened. "Who?" "We're narrowing it down, but the trail leads close. Too close." Harris glanced at the girls, then lowered his voice. "Keep them guarded. Whoever this is, they won't stop until they get what they want." The tension hung heavy through the afternoon. Security patrolled the halls. Staff whispered in corners. Even Emily's laughter seemed softer, edged with nervousness. And yet, amid the fear, something new bloomed between the two girls. They shared crayons again, whispered secrets, made up silly stories to distract from the dread. In those small moments, Anna felt something she had never truly known. Friendship. That evening, as the city lights flickered on once more, Anna stood at the window, gazing down. Somewhere below, in the restless streets, shadows moved with purpose. She pressed her palm against the glass, small but steady. Inside her, a thought grew bold. If they come again, I'll be ready. Even if I'm only 6, even if I'm afraid. And far below, in a darkened sedan parked once more on the street, a man lifted a phone to his ear and murmured, "They have no idea how close we are." Morning sunlight poured into the penthouse, catching in the glass walls and scattering across polished floors. To anyone else, the scene might have felt safe, like a sanctuary high above the noise of the city. But for Anna, safety was something fragile, like a soap bubble floating in the air. She sat at the kitchen counter, swinging her legs as she nibbled at a piece of toast. Emily sat beside her, chattering about how she wanted to show Anna her favorite dolls when they went home again. Anna forced a smile, but her eyes kept drifting to the window. She hadn't forgotten the black car. She hadn't forgotten the way its shadow lingered far longer than it should. Richard walked into the room, his tie knotted neatly, his jaw set. He kissed Emily's head and gave Anna a small nod. "Good morning, girls. Did you sleep well?" Emily beamed. "Anna told me stories until I fell asleep." Richard's eyes softened. Then she must have stories worth hearing. His gaze flickered to the window, and the softness vanished. "Security saw that car again," he said quietly. Mostly to Mrs. Johnson, who had just entered with a cup of coffee. Different driver, same plates. Mrs. Johnson frowned, her hands tightening on the mug. "Then they're circling closer." Richard nodded grimly. "Detective Harris is coming this morning. He says they may have identified who's bankrolling this." The girls fell silent. Even Emily understood more than her father might have wanted. She reached under the table and found Anna's hand, squeezing it tight. By mid-morning, Harris arrived with a stack of folders under his arm. His face carried the weight of bad news. He spread the papers across Richard's desk, pointing to photographs, company names, lists of accounts. "It's as we suspected," he said. "Mark Daniels was just a pawn. The money traces back to a rival tech consortium. But here's the twist. They weren't the only ones involved. Someone from inside your own board leaked details about the USB." Richard's eyes narrowed. "A betrayal. Yes, someone you trusted, someone who had access to your files." Harris tapped one of the documents. "We're still narrowing it down. But the enemy isn't outside your walls, he's already inside." Bah! Emily and Anna had crept closer, listening though they tried to appear distracted with crayons. Emily whispered, "Daddy's friends want to hurt him?" Anna's jaw tightened. She didn't understand corporate betrayals or boardroom politics, but she understood treachery. She had seen kids at school smile at someone's face, then whisper cruel words behind their back. This was the same, just with higher stakes. The rest of the day moved like a storm threatening to break. Guards doubled their patrols. Phones rang constantly in Richard's office. Lawyers came and went with tense faces. Mrs. Johnson tried to keep the girls occupied with puzzles and books, but Anna could feel the tension rising like a tide. That night, as the city outside fell into restless quiet, Anna awoke to the sound of footsteps. She sat up quickly, listening hard. Emily stirred beside her but didn't wake. The footsteps were soft, too soft, moving along the hallway outside their door. Anna slipped from the bed, padded barefoot to the door, and pressed her ear against it. She heard a faint click, like a handle tested gently. Her breath caught. Whoever it was, they weren't supposed to be there. She turned back to Emily, shaking her shoulder urgently. "Wake up. Someone's here." Emily's eyes flew open. Fear rippled through her instantly, but Anna pressed a finger to her lips. Quiet. They crept to the far corner of the room, crouching behind the bed. The door handle rattled once, twice. Then a shadow slipped under the doorframe. The faintest sliver of movement. Anna's heart thundered. She grabbed the closest thing she could, a heavy book from the nightstand. Her hands shook, but she raised it high, ready. Just as the door began to ease open, voices erupted in the hall. "Freeze! Security!" Boots pounded, radios crackled, and the shadow vanished. The door slammed shut. Emily whimpered, burying her face in Anna's shoulder. Anna held her tight, whispering fiercely, "They didn't get us. We're safe." Moments later, Richard burst into the room, his tie gone, his face pale with fury. Guards flanked the door, weapons drawn. He knelt beside the girls, pulling them both into his arms. "It's all right, you're safe. I promise you, you're safe." But Anna could feel the tremor in his chest, the anger vibrating through him. She knew his promise was more a vow than a guarantee. Whoever had sent that intruder wasn't finished. They had only begun. Later, after calm was restored and the girls were tucked back into bed, Richard stood with Harris in the study. His voice was low, dangerous. "They came into my home. They tried to touch my child again. Find them, Harris. Find them before I do." Harris nodded grimly. "We will. But you need to be prepared. Whoever's orchestrating this is bold enough to walk into the lion's den. That means they think they can win." Richard stared out the window at the city lights. Then they've never fought a father before. Anna, lying awake in the dark, heard the distant murmur of voices. Her small fists clenched beneath the blanket. She was only 6. She was supposed to be small, powerless, but she knew this much. If the shadows returned, she would fight them again. She would fight for Emily, for herself, for the truth that even the smallest voice could scream loud enough to matter. And far below, in another corner of the city, a man in a suit raised a glass and said to his unseen partners, "The girl ruined the first plan. Next time, she won't be so lucky." Rain fell over the city in long silver streaks, soaking the streets and blurring neon signs into smeared colors. From the penthouse windows, the world below looked like a painting melting underwater. Anna pressed her forehead against the glass, her breath fogging the surface, and watched umbrellas bob like black mushrooms across the sidewalks. The steady rhythm of the rain should have been calming, but it wasn't. It sounded too much like the footsteps she had heard outside the bedroom door the night before. Behind her, Emily sat cross-legged on the rug, arranging her dolls in neat rows. She was trying to act normal, humming a tune, but her hands trembled as she tied ribbons in the doll's hair. "Do you think Daddy will catch them?" she asked suddenly, not looking up. Anna turned and walked over, sitting beside her. "He will. The police will too. They have to." She said the words firmly, though a part of her doubted. She was only 6, but she understood that bad men didn't always get caught right away. Richard entered the room just then, his phone pressed to his ear. His suit jacket hung open, and his tie was loose, but his presence filled the room with the same authority as always. He ended the call, his expression stormy. "There's been another breach," he told Mrs. Johnson, who was pouring tea nearby. "One of my offices downtown was broken into last night. Files were stolen." Mrs. Johnson's hand froze around the teapot. "Files?" Richard's voice lowered. "Everything related to the USB. Whoever is after it. They know exactly where to look." Emily's humming stopped. She looked at her father, her face pale. "Daddy, are they coming again?" Richard crossed the room and knelt in front of her, taking her small hands in his. "They won't get near you, Emily. Not ever again. That's my promise." He glanced at Anna, his eyes softening. "To you as well." Anna ducked her head, her cheeks flushing. She didn't feel like someone who deserved promises from billionaires. She felt like a child who had gotten lucky in an alley. Yet Richard looked at her with the same fierce protectiveness he gave his own daughter, and that warmed something in her chest. Detective Harris arrived an hour later, his coat dripping from the rain. He spread out fresh photographs on Richard's desk. The girls hovered near the doorway, listening as always. "This wasn't random," Harris said, tapping a photo of the ransacked office. "They knew exactly where to go, which means our mole is still feeding them information." "Men," Richard's face darkened. "Someone I work with. Someone I sit across the table from every week. Is trying to destroy me." Harris nodded. "And they're willing to use children as pawns. That tells us what kind of enemy you're dealing with." Anna shivered. Emily slipped her hand into hers again. Neither girl spoke. But they didn't have to. They both knew they were standing in the middle of something far bigger than themselves. That evening, Richard insisted on taking the girls and Mrs. Johnson out for dinner, hoping to give them a break from the walls of the penthouse. Security cars followed in convoy, their lights discreet but constant. They arrived at a small Italian restaurant tucked between tall buildings, a place Richard had loved since his younger days before wealth set him apart. The air smelled of garlic and warm bread. Candles flickered in glass jars, throwing soft light across red-checkered tablecloths. For a little while, the tension eased. Emily giggled as she twirled spaghetti around her fork. Anna's eyes widened at her first taste of real lasagna, richer and heavier than anything she'd ever eaten. Mrs. Johnson smiled faintly, the lines in her face softening. But even in this cozy place, shadows lurked. Anna noticed 2 men at the bar who never touched their drinks, their eyes scanning the room too often. She leaned toward Emily and whispered, "Don't look now. But I think someone's watching us." Emily's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "What do we do?" "Stay calm," Anna whispered back. "Act normal." Richard noticed the same men a moment later. His jaw tightened, but he didn't show fear. He signaled discreetly to one of his guards, who slipped out the back door. Within minutes, plainclothes officers entered the restaurant and took positions. The 2 watchers at the bar exchanged a glance and left hurriedly, slipping into the rainy night. Richard exhaled slowly, forcing a smile for the girls. "Everything's fine. Just a misunderstanding." But his eyes betrayed him. Hard and watchful. Back at the penthouse that night, the rain still poured down, drumming against the windows like 1,000 impatient fingers. Emily curled against Anna under the blankets, whispering, "They'll never stop, will they?" Anna swallowed hard, staring into the dark. "Maybe not yet. But we won't stop either." "Rue," She didn't know where the courage came from, only that it burned inside her like a tiny flame refusing to go out. And though she was just a little girl from a poor neighborhood, she believed her words, because sometimes belief itself was the strongest weapon of all. In another part of the city, a man in a tailored suit stood by a window, watching the rain streak down. He held a phone to his ear and spoke with quiet certainty. "The USB will be ours. The Walker girl is still our best leverage. Next time we won't fail. And the little one who interfered, she'll be dealt with." The rain finally eased by dawn, leaving the city washed clean but heavy with fog. From the penthouse balcony, the streets below looked blurred, as if the world were trying to hide its secrets. Anna wrapped her arms around herself, shivering though the air was mild. She had dreamed again of the alley, the men, the gun, Emily's frightened sobs, and now the memory clung to her skin like damp clothes. Inside, Richard was pacing. His voice carried through the rooms, low and determined as he spoke to Detective Harris on the phone. "The restaurant incident proves it. They're watching us everywhere. My office, my home, even family dinners. This city isn't safe for my daughter or for Anna." Harris's voice crackled faintly through the speaker. "Then it's time we move them. I've arranged a safe house outside the city. Remote, guarded. They'll be secure there until we unravel who's behind this." Richard glanced toward the living room, where Emily and Anna were curled together on the couch, half listening to a cartoon, half whispering secrets to one another. They deserve peace, even for a little while. By noon, a convoy of black SUVs rolled quietly into an underground garage. Richard, Emily, Anna, and Mrs. Johnson climbed inside the middle vehicle, surrounded on all sides by security. The ride was long, winding through city streets and then out into countryside roads. The towers faded, replaced by rolling hills and thick trees. Emily leaned her head against Anna's shoulder, her voice soft. "Do you think it'll be safe there?" Anna squeezed her hand. "If it isn't, we'll make it safe." She spoke with more confidence than she felt. But Emily's small smile told her it was the right thing to say. The safe house was nothing like the glittering penthouse. It was an old farmhouse, sturdy and wide, with white paint peeling slightly around the edges, but it stood on acres of open land, far from prying eyes. Security patrols circled the property, and cameras blinked from the corners of the roof. Inside, the room smelled faintly of cedar and history. Mrs. Johnson sighed as she set her bag down on a quilted bedspread. "This feels more like home. Quiet. Honest." Richard gave her a tired smile. "Sometimes the simplest places are the safest." For a time, the girls almost forgot the danger. They explored the creaky staircases, chased each other through the orchard behind the house, laughed when the wind whipped their hair. For Anna, it was the closest thing to freedom she had felt in weeks. No glass walls, no hushed whispers, no shadows lurking at the edge of her vision. But even here, the shadows found them. That evening, after supper, Richard joined Harris in the small den. The detective spread fresh files across a wooden table lit by a single lamp. "We've traced the shell accounts further. The money funnels through 3 layers, but the name that keeps surfacing is Stanton Holdings." Richard's brow furrowed. "Stanton? Harold Stanton sits on my board. He's been with me for over a decade." Harris nodded grimly. "Which means your suspicions were correct. The traitor isn't outside your walls. He's been inside the entire time." Richard's fists clenched. "He betrayed me. Worse, he endangered my child. That's not business rivalry. That's cruelty." Anna, lingering just outside the door, caught the name. She didn't understand corporate power or holding companies, but she recognized betrayal when she heard it. It was the same sting she'd felt at school when someone smiled at her, only to mock her the moment her back was turned. This betrayal, though, was far deadlier. That night, as the safe house grew quiet, Anna awoke to the sound of voices outside her window. She crept to the sill and peeked through the glass. 2 guards stood near the orchard, speaking in urgent whispers. She couldn't hear the words, but the way one of them gestured toward the woods made her stomach knot. She turned back to the bed where Emily slept soundly. A wave of protectiveness washed over her. She knew, with a certainty far too old for her years, that peace never lasted long. The men who wanted Emily and the USB would come again. Anna slid back under the covers and whispered into the darkness, "If they come, I'll be ready." Far beyond the orchard, in the tree line, another shadow stirred. A man raised binoculars to his eyes, watching the farmhouse. He lowered them slowly and spoke into a radio. "They think they're safe. They're not. Orders are clear, the Walker girl and the one who protects her. Next move happens soon." The farmhouse creaked in the night, its old wooden beams carrying the size of history. Anna lay awake in the narrow bed, her eyes open wide in the dark. Emily breathed softly beside her, curled like a kitten, her blonde hair spilling across the pillow. The room smelled faintly of lavender and cedar, a comfort she tried to cling to. But outside, the orchard loomed like a sea of black shapes swaying under the moon, and Anna couldn't shake the memory of the guard pointing toward the trees. She sat up slowly, her small hand clutching the quilt, and listened. At first, there was only silence. Then, faintly, a twig snapped. It was so soft, she wondered if she had imagined it. But the sound tightened her chest all the same. She slid out of bed and padded to the window, lifting the curtain just enough to peer outside. The orchard rippled with wind, but somewhere beyond the trees, a figure moved too steady, too purposeful to be the breeze. Anna's heart thudded. She turned quickly, shaking Emily's shoulder. "Wake up," she whispered urgently. Emily groaned, half asleep. "Anna, what is it?" "Someone's out there," Anna said. "In the orchard." Emily's eyes shot open, fear immediately replacing sleep. She scrambled up, clinging to Anna's hand. "What do we do?" Anna swallowed hard. "We tell your dad, now." They crept into the hallway, their small feet silent on the old wooden floor. The farmhouse was dim, lit only by the faint glow of night lamps. The girls moved quickly toward the study, where Richard had fallen asleep in an armchair, a file still open on his lap. His face looked weary, even in rest. Lines of worry etched deep. "Mr. Walker," Anna whispered, tugging his sleeve. "There's someone in the orchard." His eyes opened instantly, sharp and alert. He sat upright, setting the file aside. "Are you sure?" Anna nodded firmly. "I saw them." Richard rose to his feet, his protective instinct already burning. He pressed a finger to his lips and guided the girls behind him as he stepped into the hall. With a quiet call, he summoned the guards. Within minutes, flashlights cut across the orchard, beams slicing through the dark. At first, nothing. Just trees swaying, leaves glistening under moonlight. Then a shout, "Over here!" The sound of boots pounding, radios crackling. A scuffle. And then silence again. One of the guards returned, his face tight. "We found signs, footprints, broken branches, but whoever it was, they slipped away before we could catch them." Richard's jaw clenched. They were testing us, seeing how close they could get. Emily clung to Anna, her small body shaking. Anna wrapped her arms around her, whispering, "It's okay. They didn't get in." But even as she said it, her own stomach twisted with fear. If the shadows could reach even here, how safe were they really? The next morning, Harris arrived early, his car crunching down the gravel drive. He listened grimly as the guards reported the intrusion. "They're watching. Waiting. They'll strike when they think your guard is down." Richard paced the kitchen, his hands braced on the counter. "Stanton," he muttered. "It has to be Stanton pulling the strings. He's the only one with both motive and access." Harris nodded. "We'll gather more evidence, but you need to prepare for escalation." They tried subtlety. Now they may get bold. Emily looked from her father to Harris, her voice small. "Why us? Why me?" Richard knelt before her, his eyes fierce but gentle. "Because they think hurting you will hurt me, but they're wrong. Because I will protect you, and so will Anna." Emily turned to her friend, eyes glistening. "You won't leave me, right?" Anna squeezed her hand, answering without hesitation. Never. Later that afternoon, the girls wandered into the orchard with 2 guards trailing at a distance. The rain had left the grass damp, the air fresh and earthy. Emily plucked wildflowers, weaving them clumsily into a chain, while Anna watched the tree line with wary eyes. "Why do you always look out there?" Emily asked. "Because that's where they'll come from," Anna replied simply. Emily was quiet for a moment, then placed the flower chain on Anna's head. "Then you'll be my knight. Even if you're small." Anna's lips curved in a shy smile. "Knights don't run away. They fight." The words were brave, but as the sun dipped lower and the orchard's shadows lengthened, Anna felt the truth pressing in. She was small, she was 6, but sometimes, small was enough to change everything. From the woods beyond, unseen eyes watched. A voice on a radio whispered, "The orchard isn't ready yet. Wait for the order." Soon, dusk settled over the farmhouse, painting the orchard in shades of amber and violet. The guards patrolled steadily, their flashlights cutting across rows of trees. Inside, the air smelled of roasted chicken and cornbread, a meal Mrs. Johnson insisted on preparing to remind the children of normal life. Anna sat at the long wooden table, her chin resting in her hand, while Emily chattered about the flower crown they had made earlier. But beneath the soft glow of the lamps, everyone carried the same weight. The intruder in the orchard had been a warning. Richard pushed his food around his plate, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. Finally, he set down his fork. "We can't stay hidden forever. Whoever is behind this knows where we are. Last night proved it. The safe house isn't a fortress, it's a target." Detective Harris, who had stayed the night after the incident, leaned forward. "Then we tighten defenses. Reinforcements will arrive by morning. But make no mistake, Richard, they'll come again. And harder." Emily's fork clattered against her plate. "Daddy, what if they break in?" Richard's hand covered hers, steady and firm. "Then they'll find I'm not the man they think I am. And they'll find out what happens when someone threatens my family." Anna watched him closely. His voice was calm, but beneath it she heard anger, not just the fury of a father, but of a man betrayed. She understood only pieces of the bigger story, yet she felt the danger wrapping around all of them like invisible chains. Night fell heavy. The farmhouse grew quiet. Guards paced outside while Harris worked in the den, his files spread wide. Emily fell asleep quickly. Her head nestled against Anna's shoulder, but Anna couldn't rest. Her eyes darted to the window, her ears straining for the smallest sound. It came around midnight. A faint crack, like wood splintering. Then another. Anna stiffened, holding her breath. The sound wasn't from the orchard, it was closer. Much closer. She shook Emily awake. "Emily, someone's here." Emily blinked in confusion, then froze as the sound came again, the unmistakable creak of a window being forced open. Anna grabbed Emily's hand. "We have to go, now." They crept into the hallway, their bare feet silent on the floorboards. But as they turned the corner, shadows loomed. 2 men, dressed in black, their faces masked. One held a crowbar, the other a pistol. Emily gasped, but Anna clamped a hand over her mouth, pulling her back. Her small body trembled, but her eyes darted desperately for escape. The men moved quietly, their whispers sharp. "The kids' room is down here. Grab them fast." Anna's heart pounded. They were after Emily. Always Emily. She tugged Emily back toward the stairs, but the floor creaked under their weight. One of the men's heads snapped up. "There! Run!" Chows erupted, shouts from guards outside, boots pounding the porch. The intruders lunged forward. Anna pulled Emily down the stairs, their hands slippery with sweat. Behind them, footsteps thundered closer. Richard burst from the den, his face carved with fury. "Get away from them," he roared. He tackled one intruder, the crowbar clattering to the floor. Harris appeared an instant later, drawing his gun. "Drop it," he shouted at the second man, who froze with his pistol raised. Anna and Emily crouched in the corner, wide-eyed. The room filled with noise, radios crackling, guards rushing in, the thud of bodies struggling. Within moments, the intruders were subdued, their hands cuffed behind their backs. Emily clung to Anna, sobbing. Anna held her tightly, whispering, "It's okay. We're safe. We're safe." Richard stood over the captured men, his chest heaving. "Who sent you?" he demanded. One of the masked men spat blood onto the floor and sneered. "You already know." Richard's jaw tightened. "Stanton." The man's silence was answer enough. Harris stepped forward, his expression grim. "We'll take them into custody." "But Richard, this proves it, they're not waiting anymore. They're escalating." Mrs. Johnson hurried down the stairs, her face pale. She swept Anna into her arms, murmuring prayers of thanks, then pulled Emily close too. "Lord above, they nearly had them." "Oh." Richard crouched before the girls, his voice steady despite the storm in his eyes. "Listen to me. They will never take you. Do you hear me? Never." Emily nodded through tears, clutching Anna's hand. Anna didn't speak, but she met Richard's gaze with fierce determination. She was only 6, but she believed him, and more than that, she believed in herself. If danger came again, she would fight. As the intruders were led away, Harris muttered to Richard, "This won't end here. Whoever's behind this won't stop until they've broken you. And they know the fastest way to do that is through her." He nodded toward Emily. Richard's reply was quiet but cold. "Then they'll learn what happens when they come after my blood." Anna, still holding Emily close, whispered into the silence that followed, "They'll never win. Not while we're together." And in the orchard, the night wind rustled through the trees, carrying the promise of more battles to come. The farmhouse was no longer a quiet refuge. Broken glass glittered on the kitchen floor. The back window shattered where the intruders had forced their way inside. Guards moved through the rooms with flashlights, their radios buzzing with clipped updates. The air smelled of sweat, gunpowder, and fear. Anna sat on the couch with Emily curled against her side, a blanket wrapped around both of them. Her heart was still pounding, the echo of footsteps and shouts replaying in her mind. She tried to be calm for Emily's sake, but her small hands trembled. Mrs. Johnson stroked her granddaughter's hair, whispering prayers as if words alone could shield them from the darkness pressing against the walls. Richard stood in the middle of the room, his fists clenched at his sides. He had fought one of the men himself. And though his suit was torn, and his cheek bore a red scrape, his eyes blazed with a fury that seemed larger than the room. "They came for my daughter," he said, his voice low, tight. "In my home, in the place I trusted to keep her safe." Detective Harris, standing nearby, lifted a folder he had carried from the den. "The men confessed. Stanton sent them. They were supposed to grab Emily, force you to trade the USB." Richard's jaw tightened. "Stanton has underestimated me. He thinks he can use my child as a bargaining chip. He's wrong." Harris sighed. "We'll move the girls again. But Richard, you need to understand, Stanton isn't working alone. He has resources, connections. You're fighting more than one man. You're fighting an entire network." Richard turned toward Anna and Emily, who clung together like sisters. His face softened briefly, then hardened again. "Then I'll fight them all." Emily's voice broke through the tension, small but clear. "Daddy, I don't want you to fight. I just want to be safe." Richard crouched down in front of her, resting his hand on her shoulder. His eyes softened with pain. "Sweetheart, sometimes the only way to be safe is to fight. But I promise you this. I'll never let them take you. Not ever." Anna looked up at him, her small face set with a seriousness far older than her years. "And I'll help. I won't let them take her either." Richard's gaze lingered on her, surprised by the strength in her voice. "You already have, Anna." "More than once." He glanced at Mrs. Johnson, his expression heavy. "Your granddaughter is braver than most grown men I know." Mrs. Johnson's eyes glistened with pride and sorrow. Bravery is a gift, but it's also a burden. She shouldn't have to carry it at her age. Silence fell over the room, broken only by the sound of guards boarding up the broken window. Outside, the orchard stood still under the moonlight, hiding its secrets. Later, after the house settled, Richard retreated to the den with Harris. They spoke in hushed tones, but Anna, unable to sleep, crept to the doorway and listened. Harris spread papers across the table. Stanton wants the USB because it contains trade secrets that could cripple his company if exposed. But there's something else, evidence of corruption, backdoor deals, bribes. If it ever goes public, Stanton doesn't just lose his fortune, he goes to prison. Richard's face darkened. So he's willing to destroy my family to keep his secrets. Exactly, Harris said. Which means the USB isn't just valuable, it's dangerous. As long as it exists, everyone you love is a target. Anna's heart raced. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood enough. Stanton was powerful, and he was willing to hurt Emily to get what he wanted. Richard rubbed his temples. Then we can't just defend. We need to strike back. I want Stanton exposed. Everything he's done, every deal he's hidden, the world needs to see it. Harris hesitated. That will take time. And until then, you and the girls will remain in danger. Richard's voice was quiet but unyielding. Then I'll endure the danger. But Stanton will fall. Anna slipped back to the couch, her thoughts spinning. She was only 6, but she felt the weight of the storm around her. She glanced at Emily, who was finally asleep, her face soft and peaceful. Anna brushed a strand of hair from her friend's forehead and whispered, I won't let him take you. He promised. Outside, beyond the orchard, a figure crouched in the shadows, binoculars trained on the farmhouse. His voice crackled over a radio. The breach failed, but they're rattled. The next strike will be stronger. The reply came, cold and sharp. Do whatever it takes. The USB must be ours. And if the girl gets in the way again, remove her. Inside, Anna finally closed her eyes, unaware of how much closer the danger had drawn. Morning arrived like a gray sheet pulled taut across the sky. The farmhouse felt smaller now, its rooms pressed in by unease. Guards patrolled in tighter circles. A new team of federal agents had arrived, their badges clipped discreetly to wool coats. Detective Harris moved among them like a conductor, orchestrating interviews, logging evidence, and running threads of connection on a bulletin board in the den. He had a practiced calm, but even he couldn't hide the fact that the game had grown larger than any single precinct. Anna watched from the kitchen doorway as men with serious faces came and went. She traced the steam curling above her cocoa with the tip of her finger and tried to count breaths 1, 2, 3 the way her grandmother taught her when storms frightened the house. Counting helped, sometimes. It reminded her that moments passed and that endings came, eventually. Richard entered the kitchen with a folder in hand and closed the door behind him. He looked weary in a way Anna had not seen before. The steady, deliberate wear of a man who had been forced to face his own vulnerabilities. He set the folder on the table and sat down opposite her, folding his fingers around the edges until the paper creased slightly. We've gotten a little further, he said quietly. Harris has forwarded us leads. Stanton's fingerprints are all over the shell company transactions, but he's insulated himself behind layers of people. Whoever he trusts has been doing his dirty work. The question is which one of them crossed a line and sent goons to the streets. Anna nodded, though she didn't understand all of it. The men were saying things like insider, offshore accounts, and legal avenues. Those were big words. What she absorbed was the tone. Danger had names, and danger had faces. Stanton had a face somewhere in a room Anna would never see. That made it creepier somehow. Across the table, Emily stirred and looked at them both with the blunt honesty only children possess. Do you think they'll get him? She asked, voice very small. Richard looked at his daughter the way fathers sometimes looked when they were deciding what was true and what was hope. We'll try, he said. We will do everything we can. I promise. Harris called a meeting in the den at noon, the room filled with men and women who carried the authority of law, federal task force, cybercrime analysts, and a legal advisor from Walker's company. They spoke in quiet, fast sentences, sketching plans that relied on patience more than bravado, surveillance of suspected associates, legal requests for bank records, discreet interviews with anyone who had recent contact with Stanton Holdings. The room's map of the city sprouted pins, each representing a lead that could either close the net or snap it taut without catching anything. Anna sat near the doorway and drew with a stub of pencil on a scrap of paper, turning plans in her head into doodles that looked vaguely like shields. It made her feel useful. Her presence was small and simple, but she had become something people watched with more than curiosity, a symbol of defiance in small form. When the meeting broke, Harris lingered a moment and came over to Richard and the girls. "We've put together a team to follow the accounts. We'll need to move carefully. Stanton has lawyers who can stall for months. In the meantime, we'll tighten the perimeter. And Mr. Walker, you need to be prepared for fallout. Stanton may make a public move to discredit you." Richard's jaw clenched. "Let him try," he said. "My company's work is for people, employees, partners, communities. If Stanton wants a war of exposure, he'll find himself exposed instead." Outside, word of the break-in and the arrests had leaked into the morning. Local reporters gathered near the road like gulls over a fishing boat. Richard loathed the camera flashes and the intrusive questions, but he also recognized that public scrutiny could be a double-edged sword. It could help uncover networks, or it could play into the hands of those who thrived on chaos. For now, Harris kept the media at bay with measured statements while they moved quietly through the more important work of following money and motive. That afternoon, a lead came through a name attached to a wire transfer, a face on a security camera outside a shell office. It was a small thing, but finally something tangible to grasp. Harris and his team leaned over monitors and maps as if they were reading a new language. And suddenly the game had a new rhythm. Hunt. Follow. Wait. Richard's security detail dispersed, making calls to hold assets and freeze questionable accounts. The legal team drafted demands for documents. For Anna, the day was filled with strange, adult rituals that left her feeling both alien and oddly proud. She watched as grown men moved paper and authority like puzzle pieces, trying to click together an image that would make villains fall. It felt like watching construction of a bridge where every bolt mattered. That night, Mrs. Johnson made cornbread and soup again, trying to make the farmhouse feel ordinary. The girls sat close, tossed blankets over their legs, and ate in silence. The outside world felt heavy and far away, the way thunder sounds distant until it is right above you. After clearing the table, Richard took Anna aside. He didn't kneel this time. He sat on the edge of a chair and looked at her with a seriousness that softened his face. "You should know," he said, voice low, "that what you did changed things. People in my world don't always notice the smallest hands until those hands move mountains. I owe you more than I can say." Anna fiddled with a thread at the hem of her sleeve. "You already said that," she murmured. He smiled briefly and shook his head. "Words aren't enough sometimes. Actions are better." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, practical thing, a blue backpack with a simple logo and sturdy zippers. He put it on the table between them. "It's not a reward. Consider it a tool, a place to keep your things safe. And a promise. From now on, you have people who will look out for you." Anna's fingers touched the zipper as if testing whether it was real. "Will you really?" she asked. "Every day," he answered. "And we'll start tomorrow. Lessons reading, math, and how not to be scared when the world feels big." He grinned, trying to make the promise lighter. "You'll also get cookies on Fridays. That's non-negotiable." She allowed herself a small smile, then nodded. It wasn't the castle or the penthouse that mattered, it was the sense that someone bigger had drawn a line in the sand and said, "This far, no further." Anna liked lines in the sand. They were easy to see and easy to mark with a footprint. They meant you could stand somewhere and know what you were defending. Later, as evening descended, Harris announced they'd follow the new lead at first light. Men moved with purpose, prepping for surveillance that would stretch long into the next day. The farmhouse settled into a tense hush, but inside it a quiet order took root. Guards walked deliberate routes, monitors flickered in the den. Plans were drawn, and small acts of faith, a packed backpack, A promise of cookies stitched a fragile web of safety around two little girls and the adults who had vowed to keep them. Anna lay in bed that night and listened to the steady sound of rain beginning again. She breathed in and out, counting the way her grandmother had taught her. The world felt large and dangerous. But in the dark, she felt something else too. A line had been made. She could step forward and hold it. Dawn broke with a pale light, stretching thin fingers across the orchard. The farmhouse was already awake, humming with the restless energy of a war room. Agents huddled over maps and laptops. Guards checked weapons and radios. And Harris briefed his team with the urgency of a man who knew time was running out. Anna sat on the bottom step of the staircase, clutching her new blue backpack. She wasn't supposed to understand what was happening. But she listened anyway. Words like surveillance, wire transfer, shell account floated around the room. She didn't know what they meant in full, but she knew enough. They were closing in on Stanton. Emily plopped down beside her, still in her pajamas, hair sticking up in sleepy tufts. "You think today's the day?" she whispered. Anna tightened her grip on the backpack strap. "Feels like it." Richard entered the den wearing a charcoal suit, his expression carved in stone. He scanned the room and then his eyes landed on the girls. "Stay close to your grandmother today. No wandering. No orchard games. Understood?" Both girls nodded, though Emily made a small pout. Richard crouched in front of them, softening his tone. "This isn't forever. Just until we finish this. Then you'll both be free again." Emily leaned forward and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Just come back safe." Richard kissed her forehead, then stood tall again, slipping back into the armor of leadership. "Harris. Let's go hunting." By mid-morning, the convoy rolled down the gravel drive, leaving the farmhouse quieter but more tense. The remaining guards tightened the perimeter, their eyes scanning the orchard constantly. Mrs. Johnson tried to keep the girls busy with chores and games, but Anna's ears strained toward the hum of radios and the distant growl of engines. In the city, Harris and Richard's team followed the trail of money through Stanton's network. Surveillance vans parked near Stanton Holdings, lenses trained on its tinted windows. Inside, men in headsets listened to phone calls, piecing together fragments of conversation. A courier dropped off a briefcase at a side entrance. Agents followed. Every step revealed a deeper maze, numbered accounts, cutouts, middlemen, but the name Stanton pulsed like a heartbeat through all of it. Back at the farmhouse, afternoon sunlight slanted through the windows. Anna and Emily sat cross-legged on the floor with crayons spread out before them. They pretended to draw castles and knights, but Anna's eyes kept flicking to the window. She didn't trust the quiet. Not after the orchard, not after the midnight intruders. And she was right not to. Near dusk, a guard's shout shattered the stillness. "Movement in the trees," radios crackled. Boots thundered across the porch. Mrs. Johnson herded the girls into the pantry, whispering prayers as she pulled them close. Anna pressed her ear to the wooden door, her heart racing. The orchard, once so peaceful, erupted with flashes of light. Men in black darted between the rows, weapons glinting. Guards shouted back, answering with bursts of gunfire. The farmhouse shook with the force of conflict only yards away. Emily whimpered, burying her face against Anna's shoulder. Anna held her tightly, whispering, "We're okay, we're okay." But her own small body trembled as the war outside grew louder. Then silence, sudden, heavy. The kind of silence that made Anna's stomach drop. She looked at her grandmother with wide, questioning eyes. Mrs. Johnson pressed a finger to her lips. The pantry door creaked, slowly, too slowly. Anna's breath caught. A shadow fell across the crack, and then a voice hissed, "Found them." Before Anna could move, the door burst open. Two masked men filled the doorway, their eyes cold above black fabric. One seized Mrs. Johnson by the arm, shoving her aside. The other reached for Emily. Anna reacted without thinking. She grabbed the bag of flour from the pantry shelf and hurled it with all her strength. It burst midair, a white cloud exploding across the men's faces. They coughed and cursed, blinded. "Run!" Anna shouted, pulling Emily's hand. They darted from the pantry into the kitchen, feet slipping on flour dust, hearts pounding. Behind them, the men shouted in rage, stumbling after them, just as Anna thought they would be caught. The front door slammed open. Richard stormed in, flanked by Harris and 2 agents. His eyes locked instantly on the scene, his daughter, Anna, the masked men. "Get away from them," he roared. Gunfire cracked. The intruders fell. Emily collapsed into her father's arms, sobbing, while Anna clung to her grandmother, trembling but unbroken. Harris surveyed the room, his voice grim. "They're not testing anymore." This was a strike. Richard held his daughter tight, his voice trembling with fury. "Then it's time we stop waiting. Stanton wanted a war? He has one." Anna, pressed against her grandmother's side, whispered fiercely into the shaken air. "We won't let them win. Not ever." The farmhouse kitchen still smelled of flour and gunpowder. Guards dragged the bodies of the intruders outside while Harris barked orders into his radio. Richard stood in the middle of the chaos, holding Emily so tightly she could barely breathe. She didn't complain, though. Her sobs shook against his chest as if she were clinging to the only thing keeping her anchored to the world. Anna sat on a chair with Mrs. Johnson at her side, her hands still dusted white from the bag of flour she had thrown. Her heart hammered, her small body trembling with aftershocks, but her eyes were steady. She had faced shadows again and acted. Harris knelt in front of Richard, his face grim. "We can't stay here. The farmhouse is compromised. If they found us this quickly, then Stanton has someone feeding him information from inside your circle. There's no other explanation." Richard's jaw hardened. "Then we flush the traitor out. No more hiding." "We will," Harris said. "But first we move. I have another location. More secure. Federal oversight this time. We leave tonight." Emily looked up at her father, eyes wide with fear. "Daddy, I don't want to run anymore." Richard stroked her hair, his voice heavy with sorrow. "I know, sweetheart, but sometimes we move not because we're weak, but because we're smart. We'll run now so that we can stand stronger tomorrow." Mrs. Johnson spoke softly, her voice trembling with conviction. "You can run from danger, Mr. Walker, but you can't run from betrayal. Sooner or later, you'll have to face it head on." Richard met her eyes, and for a brief moment the armor dropped. He looked like a man carrying the weight of a world that refused to let him rest. "I intend to," he said quietly. By midnight, the convoy was ready. Black SUVs lined the gravel driveway, their engines low and rumbling. The girls were bundled into the back seat with Mrs. Johnson between them. Anna pressed her face to the glass as the orchard slipped away into darkness. She felt both relief and unease. Leaving meant safety, but it also meant surrendering the one place that had felt almost like home. Hours later, they arrived at a fortified compound hidden deep in the woods. The building was modern, stark, its walls lined with cameras and reinforced steel doors. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress. Emily clung to her father as they stepped inside. "It doesn't feel warm here," she whispered. "It's not meant to," Richard replied. "It's meant to keep you safe." The next day brought new revelations. Harris stormed into the briefing room, papers in hand, his eyes flashing. "We traced the comms from last night's attackers. They were in direct contact with Stanton's right-hand man, William Kane. He's been your COO for 5 years, Richard. Stanton bought his loyalty." Richard's face froze. "Kane. He sat across the table from me at every deal. He held my trust." Harris slammed the papers on the table. "And he sold it." Anna, listening from the doorway, felt her stomach twist. She didn't know the world of corporate titles, but she knew what betrayal felt like. And she knew this betrayal cut deep. Richard rose, his voice steel. "Then we have our proof. Stanton and Kane. We take them both down." Harris hesitated. "That won't be easy. Stanton has lawyers. Kane knows every corner of your business. They'll paint you as the villain, Richard. The press is already circling." Richard's eyes burned with resolve. "Then I'll give them something stronger than lies. The USB. If the world sees what's on it, Stanton can't hide. Harris frowned. That's risky. If the contents are as explosive as you say, you'll scorch the earth for more than Stanton. Partners, competitors, maybe even yourself. I don't care, Richard snapped. They came after my daughter. There is no line I won't cross now. That evening, as the compound settled, Emily and Anna sat together in a small room lined with cots. Emily's eyes were swollen from crying, but her voice was steady as she whispered, "Daddy's going to fight them." Anna nodded. "And we'll help. Even if we're small, we can help." Emily frowned. "How?" Anna's voice was soft but fierce. "By not being afraid. By not letting them win." Emily leaned against her, a tiny soldier resting her head on another's shoulder. "Then we'll be brave. Together." In the command room, Harris studied the network map glowing on the screen. Stanton's web stretched wide, but for the first time, a thread was unraveling, and Richard Walker, fueled by fury and a father's love, was ready to pull it until the whole thing collapsed. But outside the compound, in the darkness of the trees, another figure waited. He raised his phone, whispered into it, and smiled. They think they've found safety. What they've really found is their cage. The compound's walls loomed like iron promises, bristling with cameras and guards. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Every door clanged shut with finality. Every radio crackled with clipped voices. To Anna, it felt less like safety and more like being locked inside a giant box. She sat on the cot beside Emily, fiddling with the zipper of her blue backpack, listening to the hum of machinery beyond the walls. Emily hugged her knees, her eyes wide. "Do you think they'll find us here too?" Anna looked around at the steel doors, the guards in body armor, the lights that never seemed to dim. She wanted to say no. She wanted to tell her friend that they were safe. Instead, she whispered, "I don't know. But if they do, we'll be ready." In the control room, Harris stood over a glowing map, tracing Stanton's network with his finger. "We've tightened the noose. We know Stanton is using William Kane as his inside man. The question is, where does the money move next?" An analyst typed furiously at a terminal. "We've tracked a fresh wire transfer 7 figures, routed through 3 shell accounts. Destination, an unregistered warehouse on the waterfront." Richard leaned over the table, his face carved with determination. "Then that's where Stanton's people will be. And that's where we end this." Harris frowned. "It could be a trap." Richard's eyes hardened. "Everything's a trap. The difference is whether we spring it on our terms or theirs." That night, the compound moved like an armed hive. Vans rolled out, carrying agents toward the waterfront. Guards doubled around the perimeter. The girls were shepherded into the innermost room, where Mrs. Johnson tried to soothe them with stories of her youth. Anna listened, but her ears strained for the distant thrum of engines, the whispers of radios. She knew something was coming. She could feel it in her bones. And she was right. Near midnight, a power surge rippled through the compound. Lights flickered, then died. Emergency generators kicked in, but for a moment the entire fortress went black. Radios squawked static. Guards shouted into the dark. Anna clutched Emily's hand. "Stay close." The emergency lights glowed red, bathing the hallways in a sinister glow. Alarms wailed. Harris's voice crackled over the intercom. "Breach on the north wall. All units, respond." The girls huddled against Mrs. Johnson, trembling as footsteps thundered past their door. Through the thin crack of the frame, Anna saw shadows darting down the hall, not guards, but intruders dressed in black, moving with terrifying precision. Emily whimpered, "They're here." Anna's heart hammered, but she forced her voice steady. "We have to hide. Now." She dragged Emily toward a storage closet tucked beside the cots. They squeezed inside just as the door burst open. Masked men flooded the room, their guns sweeping the corners. Mrs. Johnson stood tall, defiant despite the barrel pointed at her chest. "Where are they?" one snarled. Mrs. Johnson's chin lifted. "Not here." The man shoved her against the wall. "Search." Anna clamped her hand over Emily's mouth, holding her breath as boots thudded around them. The closet smelled of metal and dust. Every creak of the floor threatened to give them away. Anna squeezed her eyes shut, whispering silently in her mind, "Don't look here. Please don't look here." Outside, chaos erupted. Gunfire rattled the compound. Harris barked orders, his voice sharp even through the alarms. Richard's voice roared above it all. "Find my daughter." The intruders retreated after only minutes, dragging Mrs. Johnson with them. Anna burst from the closet as soon as the hall cleared. Emily sobbing in her arms. The room was torn apart, cots overturned, blankets shredded. "Grandma," Anna cried, her voice cracking, but Mrs. Johnson was gone. Moments later, Richard stormed in, his face pale with horror. He scooped Emily into his arms, then turned to Anna, his voice breaking. "What happened?" "They took her," Anna whispered, tears streaking down her flour-dusted cheeks. "They took Grandma." Richard's jaw clenched, fury flooding his features. Harris entered behind him, grim and breathless. They left fast. This wasn't about destroying the compound. It was about leverage. They took her as bargaining power. Richard's voice was steel. "Then Stanton has made his last mistake. He thinks he can threaten me with the people I love. He's wrong." Anna wiped her tears, her voice trembling but fierce. "We'll get her back. We have to." Richard looked at her, this small girl who had thrown milk at kidnappers, who had stood steady when the world shook. He nodded. "Yes, Anna, we will, and when we do, Stanton will never hurt another family again." Outside, the compound's alarms still wailed into the night. Inside, a new resolve was forged in the heart of a billionaire, a grandmother's granddaughter, and a child who had learned that courage sometimes meant standing even when your knees wanted to give way. The compound felt hollow after the breach. Guards patched the wall, electricians rewired the generators, agents reviewed surveillance footage, but the air itself was heavy, as though the building was mourning. Anna sat on the edge of her cot, her blue backpack clutched in her lap. The silence of Mrs. Johnson's absence weighed on her chest like a stone. Emily sat close, her hand gripping Anna's. "She was so brave," she whispered. "She didn't tell them where we were." Anna swallowed hard. Her throat ached, but her voice was steady. "That's why we have to be brave now. For her." In the command room, Harris paced while Richard stood rigid at the center table, staring at a phone that had been buzzing all morning. The kidnappers hadn't called yet, but the silence was louder than any demand. Harris broke it first. "They'll reach out soon. Stanton knows the value of what he's holding. He won't hurt her unless he thinks it gains him something. That means he'll want to talk." Richard's jaw tightened. "And when he does, we'll trace it. We'll take him down." "Careful," Harris warned. "If Stanton senses you're baiting him, he'll make an example of her. That's how men like him work. Cold, calculated." Richard slammed his fist on the table. "He took a grandmother. A woman who's done nothing but raise a child with love. There is nothing calculated about that. It's cruelty." The phone rang. Every head turned. Harris picked it up and pressed a button, routing the call through the speaker. A distorted voice filled the room. "Walker, you know what I want." Richard's voice was steel. "If you've heard her, she's alive." The voice cut him off, smooth and mocking. "But she won't stay that way unless you deliver the USB. You have 48 hours. No police. No games. Bring it yourself." Richard's hand tightened around the edge of the table. "And if I don't?" A muffled sound carried over the line Mrs. Johnson's voice, hoarse but defiant. "Don't you dare give them anything, Richard." The call cut abruptly. Emily clapped her hands over her mouth, tears spilling. Anna sat rigid, her fists clenched in her lap. The sound of her grandmother's voice even strained. Even in chains ignited something inside her. Not fear. Fire. Harris exhaled slowly. "They'll call again. We'll triangulate next time." Richard turned to him, eyes blazing. 48 hours isn't enough for paperwork and warrants. We can't play their timetable. We need to move first. You mean strike? Harris asked. Richard nodded. If I give them the USB, Stanton wins. If I refuse, Mrs. Johnson pays the price. The only option left is to take the fight to him. Harris hesitated, then leaned closer. That's a dangerous road. Once you escalate, there's no turning back. Richard looked toward the room where the girls sat clinging to each other. We passed the point of no return when he came for my daughter. That night, the compound's lights dimmed. Anna lay awake, Emily curled against her side. The silence between them was heavy, but alive with determination. We'll get her back, Anna whispered, her voice fierce in the dark. Grandma always says love is stronger than fear. That's why she didn't tell them. That's why we'll win. Emily's small hand tightened in hers. Even if we're scared? Especially if we're scared, Anna answered. Meanwhile, Richard sat in the command room with Harris, and a map spread wide before them. Red pins dotted warehouses, shipping yards, abandoned factories, all potential places Stanton might hide his captives. Every one of these could be the site, Harris said. But based on the transfer patterns, I'd put my money on the waterfront warehouse. It matches the wire. Richard's eyes narrowed. Then that's where we'll go. Harris nodded reluctantly. I'll assemble a team. But understand Stanton may want you to come. This could all be part of his design. He's baiting you. Then let him think he's winning, Richard growled. While we tear his empire apart. In the quiet of her room, Anna drifted to sleep at last, her grandmother's voice still echoing in her ears. Don't you dare give them anything. It wasn't just defiance. It was faith. Faith that the truth would stand stronger than lies. And in a warehouse by the docks, Harold Stanton poured himself a glass of wine. Listening to the crackle of the recorded call, he smiled thinly. He'll come, they always do, and when he does, the USB will be mine. The city's docks were a graveyard of steel and silence. Rusted cranes hunched over empty shipping containers, their shadows long beneath the sodium lights. The water lapped against pilings, carrying the stink of oil and brine. It was the kind of place where secrets thrived, and where Stanton had chosen to make his stand. From a distance, Anna pressed her face to the SUV's window, watching the jagged shapes of warehouses rise like broken teeth. Emily sat beside her, fingers laced so tightly with hers that their knuckles turned white. Neither girl should have been here. But Richard had refused to leave them behind after the compound breach. I'll protect you better if you're where I can see you, he had said. Anna didn't know if that was true, but she knew one thing. This night would decide everything. In the front seat, Harris murmured into a headset. His eyes locked on the warehouse looming ahead. Surveillance confirms heat signatures inside. Guards posted at every entrance. Stanton's not being subtle. He wants us to come. Richard's face was granite. Then, let's not disappoint him. The convoy halted in the shadow of stacked containers. Agents poured out, dark figures armed and ready. Richard stepped from the SUV, buttoning his coat, and turned back to the girls. Stay inside until I say. Do you understand? Emily nodded quickly, but Anna leaned forward, her voice fierce. Bring Grandma back. Richard softened, just for a moment. I will. The team moved like a tide, spreading across the yard. Shadows flickered in the warehouse windows, the glow of flashlights sweeping. Then, a voice boomed from loudspeakers hidden in the steel walls. Richard Walker. Stanton's drawl echoed across the docks. I knew you couldn't resist. You brought your little entourage. I see. But you've also brought what I asked for, haven't you? Richard stepped into the open, his voice cold. You'll never see that USB. A chuckle rolled from the speakers. Then perhaps you'd like to see what I have. A floodlight snapped on. In its harsh glare, Mrs. Johnson appeared, bound to a chair at the warehouse entrance. Her face was bruised, but her chin lifted in stubborn defiance. Grandma, Anna cried, lunging forward, but Harris's hand pressed her back. Not yet, he hissed. Stanton's voice purred. 48 hours, Walker. That was the deal. Hand me what I want, and she walks away alive. Refuse, and he let the silence hang like a blade. Richard's voice thundered back. You want leverage? You have none. Because tonight, Harold, the world learns who you really are. At his signal, Harris held up a tablet. The USB had already been decrypted. Files of offshore accounts, bribes, and criminal transactions were streaming live to federal servers. A team downtown was feeding it to every news outlet in the country. Stanton's laugh crackled through the speakers, sharp, brittle. You think exposure will stop me? You've just signed her death warrant. Gunfire erupted. Masked men poured from the warehouse, their rifles spitting sparks. Agents returned fire, the yard exploding into chaos, the air filled with shouts, ricochets, the metallic stink of blood. Anna and Emily ducked in the SUV as bullets pinged off the steel around them. Anna's small body shook, but her eyes burned with determination. We can't just stay here, she hissed. Emily's voice cracked. But what can we do? Anna's gaze darted to the chaos. Guards and agents clashed, but in the confusion, no one was heading straight for Mrs. Johnson. She sat still in the floodlight, exposed, waiting. Anna's decision came like lightning. We go to her. Before Emily could stop her, Anna shoved the door open and bolted into the night. Emily, torn between fear and loyalty, scrambled after her. The yard was a battlefield, bullets whining, shouts echoing, but the girls were small, darting between containers, invisible in the storm of violence. Richard caught sight of them, his heart nearly breaking from his chest. Anna. Emily, no. He surged forward, covering them with fire. Harris swearing at his side. The girls reached Mrs. Johnson. Anna fumbled with the ropes, her small fingers raw against the knots. Emily tried to shield her with her body, whispering, Hold on. Grandma. We're here. Mrs. Johnson's eyes shone with tears. You foolish, brave children. A masked man spotted them and charged, gun raised. Anna froze until a shot rang out. The man crumpled. Richard stood behind him, smoke curling from his pistol. He dropped to his knees, cutting the ropes with a knife. I've got you, he told Mrs. Johnson, his voice breaking. He pulled the girls into his arms in one fierce embrace. Never again, do you hear me? Never again. But Stanton's voice slithered over the loudspeakers once more, calm amid the chaos. You've won nothing, Walker. You've exposed me, yes. But you've also exposed yourself. The game isn't over. It's only begun. As agents stormed the warehouse, dragging out Stanton's remaining men, Richard looked down at the girls, Anna fierce, Emily trembling, Mrs. Johnson weak but alive. He knew Stanton's words were more than bluster. This night was not an ending. It was a threshold. The first light of morning crept across the waterfront, staining the docks gold after a night of gunfire and shadows. The warehouse was secured, its doors thrown open, its secrets laid bare. Stanton's men lay in handcuffs, their weapons scattered across the concrete. Federal agents moved through the wreckage, cataloging evidence, radioing updates, securing the scene. Richard stood near the water's edge, the cold air biting his face. He had not slept. His suit was torn, his hands bruised, but his eyes burned with a steady fire. Harris approached, his own face drawn with exhaustion. It's over, Harris said quietly. The files are in federal custody. Stanton's network is unraveling. The press is running the story already. Fraud, bribes, offshore accounts. His empire is gone before the sun's fully up. Richard's gaze stayed on the horizon. And Stanton himself? Harris shook his head. Gone. He slipped out during the firefight. We'll find him, but for now he's a ghost. Richard exhaled slowly, the steam of his breath rising like smoke. A ghost still has teeth. Behind them, Mrs. Johnson sat wrapped in a blanket on the back of an ambulance. A medic tended her bruises, but her eyes shone with the stubborn pride of a woman who had stared fear in the face and refused to bend. Emily clung to her side, refusing to let go even as she dozed, exhausted. Anna stood a few steps away, her blue backpack slung across her small shoulders. She watched the agents, the flashing lights, the tide lapping against the dock. Her face was pale but resolute. She had been through fire and come out stronger. Richard walked over to her, kneeling so that his eyes met hers. "You were brave last night. Braver than I had any right to ask of you." Anna's chin lifted. "I wasn't brave. I was scared. But I couldn't let them take her. Not Emily. Not Grandma. Wait." Richard's voice softened, his throat tight. "That's what real bravery is. Doing what's right even when you're afraid." She studied him for a moment, then asked, "Is it really over?" He hesitated, then answered honestly, "No. Stanton will keep coming. Men like him don't stop until they're forced to. But he's weaker now. And we're stronger. Because of you." Mrs. Johnson, overhearing, smiled faintly. "That child carries a lion's heart in a small frame. Don't forget it, Mr. Walker." Richard nodded, his jaw set. "I won't." By midday, the convoy was ready to return to the city. News vans had gathered at the edge of the cordon, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing. Richard shielded Emily and Anna as they walked past, ignoring the chaos. He had no words for the press yet. Justice needed more than sound bites. At his headquarters downtown, a different scene awaited. Employees crowded the lobby, watching the news feed on giant screens. The story was everywhere. Harold Stanton exposed corruption at the highest levels. Gasps and murmurs filled the room as Richard entered with his daughter and Anna at his side. People stepped back, making a path, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear, admiration, and relief. Richard didn't pause. He carried Emily in his arms, his hand resting firmly on Anna's shoulder, and climbed the stairs to his office. Harris followed close behind, phone buzzing with updates. Inside, Richard set Emily down gently on the couch, then turned to the window, gazing out at the city skyline. "This city almost took my daughter," he said, his voice low but steady. "It almost took Anna. It tried to break me, but it didn't." Harris cleared his throat. "And it won't. Stanton's days are numbered. He'll run, but he can't hide forever. The law will catch him." Richard shook his head slowly. "The law will, yes. But if the law hesitates, I won't." Silence hung between them, heavy with promise. Later that evening, when the noise had quieted, Richard invited Anna and Emily onto the balcony. The city stretched out beneath them, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Emily leaned against her father, her eyes half closed, while Anna stood with her backpack at her feet, staring at the horizon. Richard looked down at her. "You've become part of this family, Anna. Not because you saved Emily, though you did, but because you never gave up. Not once." Anna's eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears away. "Families don't give up on each other." Richard smiled faintly. "No, they don't." Mrs. Johnson stepped out, her voice warm but firm. "And don't you forget, Mr. Walker family is the one fortress no enemy can breach." The city hummed below them, restless and alive. Stanton was still out there, somewhere in the shadows, but his empire was crumbling, and in the light of that balcony stood a new alliance, a billionaire, his daughter, a grandmother, and a 6-year-old girl who had proven that courage could come from the smallest of hearts. As the first stars blinked into the sky, Anna whispered to Emily, "See? We made it." Emily squeezed her hand, smiling through the weariness. "Yeah, we did." And though danger lingered beyond the skyline, for this moment, hope burned brighter than fear. The story of Anna, Emily, and Richard Walker leaves us with a timeless lesson. Courage is not measured by age, power, or wealth, but by the willingness to stand firm in the face of fear. Anna, only 6 years old, proved that even the smallest voice can rise above violence and betrayal to protect what is right. Richard learned that no empire, no business deal, and no fortune is worth more than family, and that true strength lies not in control but in love and sacrifice. And Mrs. Johnson's steadfast resilience reminded us that dignity endures even under threat. Together, their journey teaches us that justice is rarely easy, But when love and loyalty guide us, even the darkest battles can be turned into victories of the heart.